How do you think you will handle the death of your narcissist mother? Have you been through it already? Or are you wondering how you're going to get through it? What are you going to feel? Relief? Guilt? Or sadness? In this video, I'm going to share with you my own experiences and my own feelings following the recent death of my narcissist mother. I'm Carol Rethel, and this channel is about healing with self-love, because self-love is essential to heal from a high level. At the beginning of the month, I received a phone call to tell me my mother had passed away the prior evening. My immediate reaction was just shock, like I'd been slapped in the face. She was elderly, so it was going to happen any time soon, and she lived in a rest home because she had become quite demented with Alzheimer's. So it was inevitable sometime, but it was a shock. A few seconds later, my mother instincts kicked in and my focus was on my son. He had had a close relationship with her. He was in shock, but grieving already, as was to be expected. But he was okay. I was able to take a deep breath and release my anxiety about him. But me, I spent the next 2 days feeling numb, unable to settle into anything, and waited for the grief to kick in. But it didn't. And here is where I voiced the feelings that really surprised me. I felt relief. At first, it was a completely self-survival relief that the long years of malignant behaviour towards me were over. I felt a releasing of tension from around my shoulders that I had been carrying just fall away. I know, how can you be relieved that your mother passed away? Believe me, I went through a moment of guilt about feeling relieved. Society has heavily conditioned us to feel sad when our parents depart. But I was feeling very different. Rather than get into the I'm a bad daughter mindset, which had been programmed into me all my life, I chose to accept my feelings as valid and let go of all judgment about them, because I knew that judgment wasn't real. Instead, I allowed whatever feeling was going to come up to come up. I spent a lot of time in a sort of meditative state, allowing myself to see my feelings, and I made a point of loving everything I saw. I knew the passing of my mother was a major, pivotal point in my life, so I didn't distract myself from it. I knew I had to just sit and be with whatever arose and allow it to be what it was. I also felt gratitude. I was mostly grateful that before my mother passed, my sister and I had found our way back together after years of separation due to the triangulation of our mother. Triangulation describes when a narcissist divides and conquers people, keep them apart so that they could be more easily controlled. A very typical narcissist tactic. After the period of introspection, I was ready to lift my view to the spiritual perspective and look at it all from the bigger picture that I have come to know and understand. I understood my mother and I were part of a soul family who agreed to come into this lifetime for reasons of our own and play the role of family members with each other, as we have been doing lifetime after lifetime. Every relationship brings information, experiences, and lessons. I asked, what have I learnt from this whole experience, now that my relationship with her on earth has ended? I learned the power of self-love. I used to hate myself. I had been conditioned to hate myself. Loving myself set me free to be able to listen to my thoughts and feelings with compassion rather than judgment. Loving myself enabled me to support myself through the toughest of times. And getting through those tough times has taught me how incredibly strong I am. I learned to stand up for myself despite the cost of doing so. There were some very hairy moments when the tide in the family turned against me. I think if I had not stood up for myself, I would have despised myself for being weak. I knew too much about the cost of living a lie when I knew my self-esteem was hanging on me living my truth. I couldn't fake it anymore. So I took the slings and the arrows and just loved myself through them. It wasn't easy, but I became stronger within myself. I also developed an optimistic sense that the universe is working for me, not against me. And I had the sense that all will be well in the end. Even when I was going through my darkest moments, I knew I would be okay. And the way things have turned out, I was right. Most of all, I learnt the power and true meaning of forgiveness. Having researched narcissism and the causes of it, I knew my mother was as much a victim of her disorder as was I and everyone else she picked on. I could not blame her for having the mental impairment, which narcissist personality disorder really is when we consider the brain scans of narcissists. Did you know there are over 10 areas in the brain of a narcissist that never developed? I will make a video about that later. The main effect of that lack of activity is the inability to have empathy, the ability to feel what someone is going through, and also related to the lack of behavioural control. Typically, narcissism is started very early in life, while the brain is rapidly developing. If a young person is treated maliciously by someone who should love them, or fears for their life, it is enough to trigger the disorder. My mother grew up in Britain during World War II, and it must have been terrifying hearing the bomb sirens going off, blackouts at night time, bomb shelters, quite frankly fearing for her life while she was so very young. Her father was in the war, so it must have been terrifying to wonder if she was ever going to see him again. Fortunately, he came home, but he was afflicted with post-traumatic stress disorder, and I recall her saying he was remote and distant after that. Both the war and the change in her father kind of puts the stamp of unsafe all over Mum's early childhood. So I understood. She was a victim too. And the point came where I needed to say goodbye to her. So I sat quietly and reached out with my senses for her. I felt her spirit hovering nearby, but not quite close like other people who pass when they say goodbye to the family. She was just outside the range of perception, but I knew she was there. So I began my conversation. It was a little stilted at first. Mum, thank you for giving me life. Thank you for the lessons that I learnt from being your daughter, and I forgive you. Part of that statement was because I didn't want to create any more karmic ties with her. I have to be honest. But I also knew it was time to speak my forgiveness so she could take that with her into the home reality from where we come. I knew she would undergo a life review, and finally she would experience and understand the pain she inflicted. This is rather staggering to get your head around if this is the first time you've heard about this. But people who have died and come back, what we call a near-death experience, have reported this quite clearly. The life review is a panoramic experience, all the loving and unloving things they did. It is our own evaluation of our life, and no one is judging us, just for the record. I didn't feel any sense of vengeance that my mother was going to experience that pain. I was more grateful that at last she would understand, and that was enough for me. I wished her well for her time back home with her family, and I said, I look forward to seeing you when I come back home. I sensed her moving off after that and have not felt her around since. Lastly, I felt glad that Mum's suffering was over. She had a lot of pain in her body, plus the mental confusion that comes with Alzheimer's must have been really hard to live with. So, why have I not felt the need to grieve and cry? The thing is, a few years ago, I spent about a year grieving for the fact that my mother could never love me like other mothers loved their children. When I learned she had narcissistic personality disorder, all of my life, I just sought one word of approval from her, but it never ever came. It was a painful blow to realise that it was never going to come and that she could never change. So I had done my grieving. The actual passing of my mother was just the period at the end of a chapter, and another chapter always begins. The main thing I want to say to you after my experience is it is okay to feel anything that arises when your narcissist mother or father passes away. Every emotion is valid. No one can judge you for your thoughts or feelings aside from yourself. And I ask you not to judge yourself. Every feeling is valid. Own it, feel it, understand it. Love yourself through it. Share below and ask any questions around the subject. I am happy to make new videos if I can answer or share my experiences. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe if you like this video and share it with anyone you know who might benefit from watching. Until the next video, I'm sending you love.